Chapter 2. Drinking from a fire hose. I was in my bedroom, changing for pickleball, when the phone rang. It was a peaceful Friday afternoon, and I was looking forward to a weekend of revelry on the lake, even though the temps were frigid. I didn't recognize the number and almost didn't pick up, but I gave in on the third ring. "Hi, Gerry," said a voice I hadn't heard, in a long enough time that I had forgotten whom it belonged to. Turned out it was a casting director from The Golden, Bachelor, reaching out to see if I was still interested in trying out for the show. That was a good question. When the notice first appeared on the episode of The Bachelor that I had watched with the girls, I responded to the solicitation for eligible senior bachelors and not long after received a phone call telling me that the production company wanted to set up an interview over Zoom. This was exciting. Although it was still a long shot, I was gratified to know that my application had been interesting enough to warrant a conversation. At the scheduled day and time, I sat in front of my laptop to log on to the video meeting. Now, when I was still a member of the working world, Zoom was not a thing. I struggled mightily to figure out how to appear on camera during this dang online meeting. No matter what help and direction I received from the other participants, I simply could not get my video to function. Suddenly, my stomach dropped about 1,000 feet as I realized that no matter what I did for the video was going to work nothing because my laptop didn't have a camera. Talk about being embarrassed. I could just imagine all these millennials smacking their heads over this out-of-touch geezer. Feeling like a classic boomer, I had to do the video on my phone and the audio through my laptop, but it got done. The Zoom meeting was followed by a series of conversations, all of which was exciting and flattering, but it soon came to a screeching halt, like the rest of the world, when the pandemic hit. COVID-19 had essentially shut down most of Hollywood, or at least significantly delayed production. But now, a few years later, I was getting a call to see if I was still interested in possibly embarking on a very public journey to find love again. My reaction to the nice casting director on the other end of the line was, "Heck no. Nope, I'm not," I said. "I'm over it. I'd come a long way since that terrible first year after Tony's death. As soon as another house on the lake became available, I'd sold the one Tony and I had lived in together, albeit briefly, and moved. I didn't want to be in the house we'd shared, where the guilt was too much to bear. Moving, however, didn't soften my grief. I spent that first year thinking I was improving without any proof that I actually was. Every single day was nothing but sorrow and sadness, as well as bitter remorse for many things, like how we hadn't traveled when she was still alive and how she'd never gotten to use her she shed and make that scrapbook. I tried to soldier on. There were a lot of days when I didn't leave the house, and even more when the farthest I traveled was the 30 paces to the shady nook. In a restaurant bar where I went to eat when I couldn't stomach cooking for myself. I started thinking of all the things Tony had been so good at and committed to becoming good at them myself. I read everything about how to decorate a house and tried to make my new one a home, or at least make it look like one. Tony had been an efficient grocery shopper and a good cook, so I was going to be too. But the recipes she'd left looked like they'd been written by a chicken. My daughters and I worked together to decipher the instructions, sometimes to no avail. She had a great pasta salad that we still haven't figured out. She had a chocolate cake with chocolate icing that was a universal favorite. And ingredients, partially obscured by chocolate smudges, the recipe was written in print so tiny I practically needed a magnifying crossouts glass. There were an asides about adding this or that, as if Tony was making it up as she went along, which she probably was. This cake was perfect every time she made it, not so good when any of us did. If I wasn't grocery shopping or cooking, I was cleaning. I had the cleanest house you could ever imagine. Dusting, vacuuming, polishing. I would do anything to occupy myself so I didn't have to think about the important part of my life, which was the loss of my wife. I couldn't contemplate how I was going to get through the next 6 months, 6 weeks, or 6 days. I just wanted to think about how I could get the kitchen counter to gleam. I'd struggled and busied myself for almost a year and a half after she passed when I thought, screw this. I'm not getting better. On the recommendation of a friend, I sought out a grief counselor. At my first appointment, the therapist gave me homework. For our next meeting, he wanted me to bring a list of all Tony's good qualities because we're going to celebrate her. The floodgates opened. I remembered how great a cook she was. I remembered how dedicated a volunteer she was. I remembered how thoughtful she was, how she always remembered people's names and was so nurturing. With our daughters. A long list of all these good things came easily and joyfully to my mind, and I shared them at my second counseling appointment. "You're in good shape," the therapist said. "You don't need a third appointment. Are you sure?" I said, very unsure myself. How could I not need more help when I didn't see much better? "It's a natural process, but you're well on the way," he said. "You need to recognize that the sorrow will be there for the rest of your life. You're never going to lose it completely, but you also have the joy and the wonderful things she brought and your kids to think about. Those will always be with you as well. When I accepted that sadness would come and go but didn't need to define my entire existence, I was a lot lighter. To this day, I have days when I feel like crap. I still can't watch Chicago, Med, or Chicago Fire dramas I watched with Tony without crying. Honest to God, every single freaking time I try, I wind up bawling. What continues to shock me is how unexpectedly and spontaneously sorrow can appear. For a long time, I couldn't smell cinnamon without breaking down. The scent evoked so strongly these great cinnamon balls she made at Christmas. It was like she was there, but she wasn't. Those moments feel like a sucker punch, because I never see them coming. But I also can now celebrate Tony's. Memory. One of the ways I do that is with a picture of her on a dresser in my walk-in closet, so every morning when I get dressed, I'm greeted by a glamour shot of her. If she's looking down, I'm sure she's happy I chose such a flattering photo. After her passing, I also found strong motivation to volunteer for charity work. She was the consummate volunteer, and I wanted to be a little more like her to show the impact she'd had on my life. Now, with my golden bachelor status, I never refuse a request to appear at a charity function or make an appearance at a senior living facility. I carry her memory to each event. In Big Long Lake, I also got to know a bunch of good guys. I hadn't been without Tony for more than a month when one of them asked me to join them for their weekly breakfast. This group, known as the Old Farts and Liars Club, meets every Friday at 7 a.m. at the Big Turkey Lake Sandwich Shop, Lucille's Diner, a local fishing store, diner where they do a good breakfast and sell bait. In the Old Farts and Liars Club, when the closest Friday to your birthday rolls around, everyone else throws in $1 and treats you to breakfast. We actually have a plaque that hangs on the wall with our club's name and each member's name and birthday. I resisted going. I didn't want to see or talk to anybody other than my daughters and their families for quite a while after Tony's pass. But this guy kept bugging me. Once I started attending, I realized how cathartic it was. Everyone knew my story. The guy across the table from me had lost his wife a few years earlier. We were guys, not talking about feelings, just comparing notes. Women would call it a support network. Guys call it hanging out. I attended breakfast religiously every Friday. Those friends introduced me to other ones, and pretty soon I had joined a shooting league, a golf group, and a pickleball club. I immersed myself in my new hometown, taking a position on the board of directors of the local utility district, and becoming vice president of the Lake Association. My love life didn't go quite as seamlessly. I heeded the standard advice and didn't even think about dating for a year. Once that year was up, however, I assumed it was time for me to begin dating. I was trying to be on task and get on with life. I firmly believe life is meant to be shared with another person, and I was very lonely. But I wasn't ready. I should have listened to my heart. Instead, I resolved to find someone to date, which, surprise, surprise, turned out to be a big mistake. Later, when I became famous, a story broke about my first relationship after Tony, and there were many untruths that I won't take the time or energy to refute. However, there was one detail the story got right. I had met the woman on the receiving line at Tony's funeral. We had a connection, but I pursued a relationship far too quickly. Even if I had been in a good headspace, which I wasn't, I hadn't dated since I was 18. That alone should have been a cue to take things slowly. I took the opposite course, and before we really had a chance to get to know one another, asked her to move in with me. She was beautiful and charming, with dark eyes and black hair, very much like Tony when she was younger. In fact, this woman was younger. Energetic and full of life, she was in the middle of a successful career. But our age difference was significant and ultimately became too big a challenge. We found that we were simply not compatible on several levels, and that led to a very emotional breakup. We didn't have the same cultural references or the same goals for the different periods of life we were in. My first effort at dating after Tony's death turned out to be a failure. Much to my chagrin, that wouldn't be my last misstep as a single man trying to learn how to date again, nearly 50 years after I was last in the game. I pictured Tony looking down on me and shaking her head at my hopelessness. I definitely could have been more generous, but I wasn't far enough along in my grief to bridge those differences. After that disastrous start, I dated several very nice women. In every case, we liked each other and wanted to remain friends, but acknowledged that it wasn't a love match. I've got friends and have been casually dating, I explained to the casting director who had reached back out to me to gauge my interest. My life is pretty happy. While we were talking, I started to ask her questions about what exotic locations they were planning, and while she obviously couldn't give me any details, in a generic way she promised some pretty exciting travel. If I'm honest, I think it was the allure of exotic travel opportunities that was most enticing. Sure, high-energy dates far beyond my personal budget, and the chance to have a staff of professional matchmakers find wonderful and age-appropriate women right for me weren't too shabby either. Travel, however, was what Tony and I had most looked forward to in retirement and never got to do. What did I have to lose anyway? My daughters had been the ones to encourage me to apply in the first place, so I knew that the only two people on this earth whose opinions really mattered to me were already on board. I softened my heart, no stance to a skeptical maybe, and, by the end of the conversation, agreed to a follow-up Zoom interview, this time with a functioning camera. The Thursday before a 3-day weekend, Angie let me know she needed to work during the holiday. A valued customer needed her to be at a Zoom meeting, but she assured me it wouldn't interfere too much with our plans. The girls were both coming to the lake with their families for the long weekend. I didn't think anything of it and told her as much. I am proud of the work ethic my kids have, even when it means a holiday work call. I was also preoccupied with my own stuff, namely whether I was going to be the lead on a major reality TV show. In the last 3 months, I had done a complete 180 from what I had said to the casting director back in February. Now I wanted to be the Golden Bachelor, and with every passing day, I wanted it more. I was never thinking about Tony too. I knew I would never be able to replace her. But I daydreamed about finding my person again, someone who wanted to travel, play pickleball or hit the golf course, and make a salad while I worked the grill when we prepared dinner together. In the beginning, I didn't think the odds were very good. 10,000 guys must have applied, and at least hundreds of better candidates. But with every step of the process, I became more invested. The holiday weekend with the whole family turned out to be a welcome distraction from my growing impatience to know if I was the one. I put the Golden Bachelor out of my head and enjoyed going out on the lake, barbecuing, and just having fun with the family. Monday rolled around way too quickly for my taste. Making the most of every second of the holiday, that morning I pulled out the big grill, which I often get out when the family's here so I can cook everyone an individual breakfast. However you want your eggs, sausage, bacon, that's how you get them. After breakfast, Angie announced she had her work Zoom call. I was busy cleaning up from Dad's diner when she called me over to where she was sitting with her laptop. She didn't have to ask twice. I'm always happy when my daughters ask me business questions. I love batting ideas back and forth to sort out problems and, every once in a while, hitting a home run. I went to Angie's side, and lo and behold, looking back at me was the handsome mug of Jesse Palmer. In that moment, the wind was knocked out of me. "So, Gerry, do you want to be the Golden Bachelor?" he asked. "Is this an official offer, or are you just checking my interest level?" I think I was in shock, but when Jesse told me that yes, this was the official offer, I snapped out of it and screamed, "Hell yes!" My enthusiastic reply was followed by a lot of equally enthusiastic hootin' and hollerin', as both of my daughters, both granddaughters, and my 2 sons-in-law crammed themselves into the frame for an on-the-spot celebration. And that night, I felt a great deal of relief, and not just because I had the place to myself again. I hadn't realized how much the uncertainty of the whole vetting process was weighing on me. Day after day, I'd kept wondering whether it was going to happen or not. I'm a guy who needs resolution. The relief I experienced from finally having a definitive answer didn't last long, maybe, for one good night's sleep before it became anticipation and trepidation over becoming the first ever Golden Bachelor. I had a million questions, from the mundane to the complex. If I'm gone from home for 6 weeks, who will water my plants? How will I get my laundry done? Will anyone help me with what to wear on TV? How does this whole dating on live TV process work? When will I see my daughters again? Who can I trust? I never had any doubts about my commitment and couldn't wait for the first day. I was extremely flattered that the powers that be at Bachelor Nation thought the traits I brought were good enough for me to be the lead on one of their shows. I also felt a great responsibility. While I didn't yet know the producers and behind-the-scenes folks who would become like family, I imagined all the people betting on the success of the show, many of whom were likely struggling thanks to the pandemic shutdown of film and TV production. I was part of the pilot program. If my season didn't go well, there might not be a Golden Bachelorette or a second Golden Bachelor. A lot of people were betting their reputations and their futures on the success of my season. Then there was the issue of finding the next love of my life. From the weekend Jesse delivered the news, I was laser focused on the first night, when 22 eligible women would step out of the limos, preparing for the challenge, as if it were one of my high school basketball games or a new business. I decided that if I was just smart and observant enough, I would know which one she was. A few weeks later, when I arrived in LA, it quickly became clear that my life had taken a very unexpected turn. At the airport, I was met by a limo driver who announced, "The talent is arriving," when we approached the gated entrance to the studio. The talent? Now that I was the talent, it became clear that I might need to spruce up my appearance a little. What is just fine for life on Big Long Lake doesn't necessarily work for close-ups on camera. In my case, the caps on my 2 front teeth were a little worse for wear. To be fair, I'd had them for over 40 years after breaking those teeth playing sandlot football. While I knew they were a bit discolored, they were comfortable and functional and seemed completely capable of getting me to the end of my life. Generally, I adhere to the old saying that if it ain't broke, you shouldn't fix it. But I wasn't on Big Long Lake anymore. Instead, I was in Brentwood at the office of a dentist to the stars, where I was flabbergasted by the array of celebrity photos covering the walls, looking at the presidents, movie stars, and rock and roll legends all proudly displayed. I was starstruck to the point that I was only half listening to the dentist's final admonition after my cap replacement. These teeth are temporary. Do not use them for biting or chewing. The caps were placeholders until my permanent teeth could be implanted. Smash cut to me biting into a big juicy burger that very same night at Big Al's. Well, a front tooth remained in the burger. At the dentist the next day, where the tooth was refitted with a stronger cement, I received a gentle scolding for not following directions. Eventually, permanent teeth were installed, but not before this chapter made possible one of the many social media-fueled falsehoods to come. When America saw Teresa Nist offer me orange juice for a toast, Bachelor Nation was convinced I was a recovering alcoholic. First, the drink had vodka in it. Second, my cocktail of choice is vodka cranberry, but the dentist had told me not to drink cranberry juice because it would stain the tempo. Rarey caps. And I wasn't about to make the mistake of defying his orders twice. Not even toothlessness could dampen my excitement about the start of my search for happily ever after again. I circled the date on my calendar with the anticipation of a kid counting the days until Christmas. On a very important summer day in 2023, I woke up at 6:30 a.m. with an elated energy. My day didn't officially start for several hours, but I found it impossible to shut down my thoughts even during the exciting process of my wardrobe designer getting me camera ready for the first time. Gerry, who has been in charge of the wardrobe for the leads over many, many seasons, is an icon in Bachelor Nation. He has an awesome sense of fashion. My wardrobe for the Golden Bachelor was a whole adventure in and of itself. While we were discussing suits at one of our first meetings, he threw out the idea of a black suit. Hold on right there, I said. You will never get me in a black suit. It'll look like I'm at a funeral. When you get to a certain age, black is no longer cool. It's sad. I wanted edgy suits, ones that would make people say to themselves, ooh, I'm not sure I like that choice of color, but okay, let's go with it. Simply put, I wanted to dress 30 years younger than I was, and that's how I ended up dressing on the show. I may not have known anything about Ion, but I was a salesman by trade, and in this case, I was the product. Gerry took my measurements and picked out racks and racks of shirts, pants, suits, sweaters, and other items for me to choose from. It was amazing. If I mentioned a particular pair of shoes from Hugo Boss that I thought were nice, he'd order them in 4 colors. I think in the end I had about a dozen tailored suits. I'd never thought about it before. But getting dressed can be an intimate experience, especially if you're doing it with someone else. Gerry, who has a heart of gold, didn't impose his professional opinion. He asked good questions and listened. As the show went on, and I had additional fittings, I was always able to relax with him. Over the course of my journey, Gerry became a comforting figure. But on that first day, he was more fairy godfather, decking me out in a dark blue tuxedo that bestowed an almost magical feeling on my first evening at the mansion. I will always cherish the time I spent with Gerry. As the sun went down and the mansion was awash in lights like a Disney castle, I felt the excitement in my chest, rising to my throat, nearly choking me out of awareness. The atmosphere was electric. I couldn't wait to get started, but all these details had to be perfect. After a bit, however, geez, my 71-year-old knees were crying, get the show on the road. Then finally, the door of the very first limo opened and out stepped the first contestant on the first Golden Bachelor. Edith, a beautiful woman resplendent in a golden evening gown, met the moment, if indeed she didn't surpass expectations. Suddenly, everything went from anticipation to action. It was time to focus and pay attention. During the arrival of all 22 women, each beautiful, intelligent, and charming in her own way, I was continuously amazed at their poise under pressure. Their presence was surprisingly very calming. A few of them also made quite an impression. The entrance made by Leslie on the first night may be one of the most memorable of all time. She had me fooled, exiting the limo in a housecoat and gray granny-style wig, with the aid of a walker. It was reasonable to think that a person with some mobility challenges could be on this show. This was the Golden Bachelor, after all. When I asked if she needed any help, she cast away the walker, threw off the wig, gave her long brown hair a very sexy toss, and quipped, "Do I look like I need help?" My heart shouted, "Wow!" Leslie seemed like a party girl whom I definitely wanted to get to know better. Ultimately, though, the first impression Rose went to Faith. It wasn't because of her entrance on a motorcycle, even though that was pretty impressive. An old motorcycle guy myself, I know how tough it is to ride on wet roads wearing boots and jeans. Faith, meanwhile, rode up the mansion's driveway in a hot pink dress and coolly shook out her long brown hair after taking off her helmet. It was like a scene out of a movie, but that's not why she got the first impression rose. It also wasn't because she sang and played the guitar beautifully for me later in the evening. Instead, I gave her the first rose because of her soulful gaze. The way you look at me with those soft brown eyes, I told her. It seems you are looking into my heart. No matter how much I had thought about that night in the months leading up to it, I was totally unprepared for the reality. My daughters gave me very little advice about the first night, or any of the nights for that matter. But one thing they did say was, "Dad, do not kiss anyone the first night." They told me to get to know any woman on the show before I kissed her. My granddaughters agreed, citing the ick factor. I failed miserably. It was my first lesson in what can happen when you get caught up in the moment. It's not just the energy everyone has on that first night, it's also the velocity when things start to happen. You have been anticipating this moment for months, living it out in your head, and then when it starts for real, bam, you're drinking out of a fire hose of action. I set out to find my person, and suddenly, I was overwhelmed by all these women, many of whom I felt some kind of connection with. I think. It was all happening so fast my head was spinning. So yes, I kissed more women than I had planned, but I do not regret a single one. You never forget your first kiss, especially on a reality dating show. Mine was with none other than Teresa. We locked eyes within the first few seconds of her exit from the limo, after which she immediately went into her birthday suit shtick. As she peeled back her dress, I had no idea where to look or how to act. Even after she revealed a bodysuit instead of her naked body, I was not on solid ground. Ruffled that I couldn't pull my own shtick after all the introductions were made. I surprised her with a cupcake with a 70 candle on top because her birthday was August 4. This was the perfect let-in for me to say, "If I take a bite of this cupcake and I have a mess on my mouth from the frosting afterwards, will you help me clean it off?" Teresa didn't let the obvious invitation for a kiss pass her by. It was a deep, romantic kiss, a historic kiss in my opinion, and, I learned, the first kiss Teresa had given a man in a very long time. At the cocktail party after the limo reveals, I had fun with the women, and not just the ones I kissed. I saw each and every one of them as one of the stars of the show and was grateful to be in the middle of all. These beautiful, elegant, intelligent, vivacious people. That was a happy moment on the show when everything was possibility and nothing bad had happened yet. We were all there because we wanted to find love again. As Faith told me later, "You are just one of the girls." I took that as a huge compliment. The fun couldn't go on forever. Eventually, Jesse tapped a champagne glass and announced it was time to get ready for the to-go-pro ceremony. The moment I had been dreading since I found out I was the Golden Bachelor had arrived. Actually, I had worried about sending women home even before I got the lead gig. While waiting to see if I had been chosen as the Golden Bachelor, I spent a lot of time thinking about the role and how I would handle it. Far and away, my biggest concern was how I would let the women down easy and painlessly when they were being sent home. Was it possible to not hurt their feelings and make them feel valued even if I didn't choose them? I hated the thought of turning anyone away who had made so many sacrifices to be on the show. I still do. I never found an answer to my question, and now, as I face my first rose ceremony, I could have really used one. But first I had to decide who would stay and who would go home from the group of 22 women. Getting to know one of these beautiful, complicated women would have been a huge undertaking. But 22? Just not possible. There were no easy decisions ahead. So what does a guy do? I had to make it up. If I felt nothing when I met one of the contestants, nothing at all, she was shortlisted to go home. Any feeling was better than nothing at all. For example, Ellen was feisty, a big personality in a small package. That was something I wasn't used to, but it piqued my interest. Teresa seemed playful and adventurous from her first night antics. But what did I really know? It is entirely possible that I sent my soulmate home that first night simply because she failed to make an impression. In a relationship, chemistry is undeniable and indescribable. For the most part, my decisions that night came down to my reactions to the moments after the women exited the limos. If the gleam in her eye or the lilt of her voice made me feel something, she stayed. The only exception was Anna. She was a very kind and sensitive woman, but in our first conversation she confided in me that she traveled extensively. While travel upward of 18 weeks a year sounds exciting, it was not compatible with my lifestyle. I didn't want to be away from the lake and my family that much. You might be wondering what the rose ceremony is like in real life. Think of a Ringling Bros. And Barnum and Bailey Circus being held inside a funeral home where a wake is in progress, while just outside the door, Santa Claus is going by in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. I'm hardly kidding. To say the first rose ceremony was a sad event would be a gross understatement. It was gut-wrenching. Instead of Mr. Right, I felt like the villain, or an executioner releasing the rope on a guillotine. These wonderful and graceful women had put aside their jobs, families, and lives to have some guy, me dash the hope I could see on each one of their faces. I didn't like that role. By the time the last rose was delivered and the final toast made, it was the following morning. We had been going all night and showed no signs of slowing down. I was impressed by our stamina. I heard it wasn't unusual for the younger bachelors and bachelorettes to fall asleep during the long process of the first rose ceremony. And here we were, all awake, energized, and excited. I could go another 2 hours, I said. I didn't want the night to end or to leave that group of women. They were so kind and graceful. I couldn't imagine another setting where I would even have the chance to start a conversation with such wonderful, eligible women, other than by having a team of professionals assemble them for me. I wanted to gather every morsel of information I could get about them because I knew that the time I would have with each was extremely limited. Every second was precious in my quest to find love again. Eventually, I had to literally be pulled out of the group of women to return to my room. I needed to pace myself. I let myself be torn away, but the women made me proud as hell to be a 71-year-old.